Our first order of business is going to be pre-shrinking our tape. Now, it doesn't matter what you're using. Presumably, if you're going to be making one of these tape measures, it's going to be made out of some kind of material or fabric. So this is a cotton twill tape, something that everyone's going to have access to. This one is a 3/4 inch width. It's just plain, it's white. Now the disadvantage of twill tape is that the ink sometimes bleeds a little bit, but your marks should still be clear and relatively easy to read and understand. It's just not as tidy as using some other materials. So I'm using a lot of steam and making sure that it's really well shrunk. Just make a mark at one end. I'm going to mark one end and then I'm just going to label it with 0. And I specifically use a null set rather than a plain 0, and that's because when you're writing things by hand, it's easy to get O and 0 confused. So I will label this with a C so that I know it's my chest tape. And then I will take that 0 end, I'll place it at the end of my measuring device, and then I'll measure to the length that I require. Now, as you know, the world uses multiple different measuring systems. Doesn't matter if you're using metric or if you're using imperial. You're still going to mark the tape exactly the same way. Now this other mark that I have here, I'm going to label with the letter B, and the B stands for Bara. What I'll do from here is I'll divide this tape up into different segments. And the first thing we'll do is halves and then quarters and then eighths. So I'll begin by taking my B mark to my 0, and I'll fold the tape in half. And I'm gonna give it a little finger crease right here. And that just makes the crease nice and tidy. And then I'll just take the marker and I'll run it along the fold, just like so. And that gives me a nice clean mark. Now I'm gonna make sure that as I'm creating this tape, I'm always marking on the same side of the line. So 0 is here and it's marked below the line. So B is down here and it's marked below the line. So half, the letter that we're going to use is M. That is the abbreviation for the Spanish word media or medida. And both of those mean center or middle, okay? And that's why the letter M is used. Next, we'll find our quarters. So we'll take our 0 and we'll bring it right on top of our M. And we'll thumb press again and run our marker along the edge. And that gets marked with a single Q. We'll do exactly the same thing at the other end. The B gets folded to the M. Now this is where it gets interesting. Because these notations are written in the manner of Roman numerals, if you have 1 Q, that means 1/4. If I were to write 3 Qs, that would equal 3/4. So I have 1/4, half, 3/4, and 1 bara. Now from here, I'm going to leave the long end of the tape alone, and I'm just going to work at the small end here. So next, I'll fold the 0 to the Q. I'll make my thumb crease, and then I'll make my mark. And this is labeled for O, which is the Spanish abbreviation for ochava in Old Spanish, which stands for 1/8. Now that I've got my quarters and halves marked and my 1/8, now I'm going to switch to marking the thirds. Now I usually mark the quarters and the thirds in different colors just because it helps me create a visual language for what's what. So I'm going now to divide this in thirds, and what that means is I need to fold this so that I have 3 pieces of tape. And what I do is I will zigzag fold it like this, and I will wiggle the alignment until I have a fold underneath my 0 point, directly underneath my 0 point, and a fold directly on top of my B. Now each of these gets a mark. So I'm going to use my hot pink marker here, and I'll mark that one, and then I'll mark the second one. This is marked with a letter T for 1/3. And this one down here is marked with 2 T's, representing 2/3. For my next trick, I will take my 0 end and I'll fold it to that T. I'll make a finger crease. I'll run my marker along the edge to make my mark. And then I'll label that S for 1/6. From here, I will divide the 0. I'll take the 0 and I'll place it on the S, and I'll give my thumb crease, and now this one will be marked D for dosavo, which in Old Spanish stands for 1/12. Now the last thing I need to do is I'll divide this distance between 0 and D into 4 equal parts. So I will begin by putting the 0 to the D and making a mark. And then I'll put the 0 to that mark, and I'll make yet another mark. And then I will put my center mark to the D, and I'll make another mark. So now I have 0 to D divided into 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts. So the first one will be labeled I for 1, that's the Roman numeral 1. The second will be labeled II for the Roman numeral 2. And the third, of course, will be labeled III for the Roman numeral 3. And now I have a chest tape that is fully marked. Now there's one extra mark that I'm going to add because I find that I use it a lot, particularly for chest widths on garments. I'm going to come here and I'm going to mark T plus 2. And you see how I'm doing that. I've got the 0 end in my left hand, I've got the letter T right here, and I'm going to swing the end of the tape around, and I'll put the 2, the II, right next to the T, and then I'll make a mark where 0 meets the tape. And what that is, I will mark that with 3 O's. That is 3/8, which becomes important when you're dealing with the chest measurement. But if you actually take O and put O next to Q, right, because Q is 2/8, because that's 1/4, and you're adding an extra 1/8, and you can see that the 0 matches our 3/8 inch, or 3/8 of a tape mark. I also commonly use DIOI and SII. These are measurements that I regularly use, but because they're exactly halfway between each of these marks, it's pretty easy to eyeball them. So I've made this for the chest tape, and now I'll go back and I'll make another one for my waist, and another one for my hip, and another one for my length. Now remember, the length tape is simply half your total height. So if you are 72 inches, you will make a 36-inch tape. If your height is 186 centimeters, you will make a 93-centimeter tape. And divide it exactly as I have here. No matter which measuring system you use, whether it's imperial or metric, it doesn't matter. All you're doing is taking your initial measurements in the system that you're most comfortable with, and then you're following up by making your tape in the Bara system. Now, just as an idea, a meter is divided into 100 increments. A yard is divided into 36 increments. A vara is divided into 48. So it is its own unique system compared to the other two. Now, you'll find as we begin working with the patterns that will start to make sense, because as you do the math, you're physicalizing the math. So let's say I want to have a measurement that is MD, right? If it's written as an M and a D, then I will put my 0N wherever I'm measuring from. I'll measure out to M, and then I'll swing the D around, and I'll put the D right next to the M, and then I'll make a mark at 0. Exactly the same way that I found the 3 O's for the 3/8 of the tape when I put the 2 next to the T and marked where the 0 was. This kind of addition and subtraction is the kind of work that you'll be doing with this tape. And it's basically doing simple arithmetic in a physicalized manner with the tape itself. When you're done making your tape, I would take the iron and I would run it over your marks once again, because especially if you're using a permanent marker like the ones that I've used, this heat sets the ink into the tape, and it runs less risk of fading away later. I hope this has been nice and educational, and thank you so much for watching. Let's move on to the next step.